My stepmom actually let her abusive boyfriend Derek beat me with his belt every time I disrespected him by things like leaving dishes in the sink or coming home 5 minutes past curfew. And she would just stand there watching while he whipped me and never once told him to stop. When I begged her to protect me, she said, "Derek is the man of this house now and you need to learn your place." My name is Anna Johnson and I'm 24 years old, and I need you to understand something before I tell you this story. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you become the very ones you need protection from. It was a Tuesday night when everything changed. I was lying on my bedroom floor, blood trickling from my split lip, staring at the ceiling while my stepmom Sarah stood in the doorway. Her boyfriend Derek had just punched me in the face for talking back when I asked him to lower the TV volume because I had work in the morning. "Baby, maybe you went too far," Sarah whispered to Derek, her voice barely audible over the sound of my ragged breathing. Derek turned to her, his eyes still blazing with that sick satisfaction I'd seen too many times before. "She needed to learn respect, Sarah. Your stepdaughter has a mouth on her." I watched my stepmom, the woman who had raised me since I was 12 after my father died, nod slowly and close the door behind them. Not once did she check if I was okay. Not once did she tell him to leave. That night, as I held ice to my swollen face, I made a decision that would change everything. The next morning, I started planning my escape. What I didn't know was that in exactly 18 months, Sarah would be standing at my door, homeless and desperate, begging me to save her from the monster she chose over me. Growing up, Sarah wasn't always like this. When Dad married her 6 years ago, she was different. Protective, caring, almost maternal. I was 18 then, dealing with losing my mom to cancer when I was 10 and watching my father work himself into an early grave trying to provide for us. "Anna, baby, you know I love you like my own," Sarah used to say while braiding my hair on Sunday evenings. Those were the good days when it was just us two women figuring out life together. But grief changes people in ways you don't expect. After Dad's heart attack 2 years later, something shifted in Sarah. The insurance money wasn't enough to keep us comfortable, and she started working double shifts at the hospital where she was a nurse. That's when the men started coming around. First was Jerome, harmless enough, just boring. Then came DeAndre, who had a gambling problem and borrowed $300 from my college fund. I should have seen the pattern forming, but I was too busy trying to finish nursing school myself. Derek appeared 8 months ago like a storm cloud on a clear day. Tall, charming when he wanted to be, with that dangerous smile that fooled everyone except me. From day one, I felt something wrong in the way he looked at me. Not with desire but with calculation, like he was figuring out exactly how much trouble I'd be. "Your stepdaughter's got an attitude problem," he told Sarah after our first meeting. I had simply asked him to use a coaster for his drink on Dad's antique table. That's when I knew our house was about to become a battlefield. The violence didn't start immediately. Derek was too smart for that. First came the psychological warfare. Little comments designed to make me feel unwelcome in my own home. "Anna, why don't you find somewhere else to be tonight?" he'd suggest whenever I came home from my shifts at the clinic. Adults are trying to have a conversation. When I'd look to Sarah for support, she'd avoid my eyes. "Maybe you could study at the library, baby. Give us some space." Space. In the house my father bought. In the home where I'd lived for 6 years. The first time Derek put his hands on me was 3 months ago. I had come home early from work, exhausted after a 12-hour shift, and found them on the couch in a compromising position. "Excuse me," I said, trying to get to the kitchen for some water. Derek jumped up, his face flushed with embarrassment that quickly turned to rage. "You need to learn to knock, little girl." "I live here," I replied, too tired to filter my words. That's when he grabbed my wrist, his fingers digging into my skin hard enough to leave bruises. "You live here because your stepmom allows it. Don't forget that." I yanked away, my nursing training kicking in as I assessed the damage. 5 distinct finger marks, already beginning to darken. When I showed Sarah the bruises the next morning, she sighed like I was bothering her with something trivial. "Derek was just playing around, Anna. You know how men are." No, I didn't know how men are. My father never laid a hand on me in anger. My father taught me that real men protect women, not hurt them. That night I started looking for apartments. Finding an affordable place on a clinic assistant salary in this city was like trying to catch smoke with bare hands. Every decent apartment required first month, last month, and security deposit. Money I simply didn't have after helping Sarah with bills for the past 2 years. Derek seemed to sense my desperation. His behavior escalated from verbal intimidation to physical menace. He'd deliberately stand in doorways when I needed to pass, forcing me to squeeze by him. He'd accidentally bump into me in the hallway, always with that predatory smile. "Watch where you're going, Anna," he'd say after shoulder-checking me hard enough to make me stumble. The worst part was watching Sarah transform. The woman who once defended me against teachers, ex-boyfriends, and nosy neighbors now made excuses for every cruel thing Derek did. "He's just stressed about work," she'd say when I complained about his behavior. "You know construction is tough right now." But I knew better. I'd grown up around construction workers. Dad's friends, my uncles, good men who came home tired but never took their frustrations out on their families. 3 weeks ago, Derek crossed a line that should have been uncrossable. I was in the kitchen making dinner when he came up behind me and pressed himself against me while I stood at the stove. "You smell good, Anna," he whispered in my ear, his hands moving to my waist. I spun around with the wooden spoon in my hand, catching him across the face. "Don't you ever touch me again." His response was swift and brutal. A backhand that sent me crashing into the cabinet, my head hitting the corner with a sickening thud. "Derek!" Sarah screamed from the doorway. But instead of checking on me, instead of demanding he leave, she helped him clean the scratch on his cheek from my spoon. That night, I called my best friend Jasmine and told her everything. Her response changed my life. "Girl, you need to get out now. Come stay with me until you figure it out." Moving in with Jasmine felt like stepping out of a toxic cloud into fresh air. Her small apartment was cramped with both of us there, but it was safe. For the first time in months, I could breathe without constantly looking over my shoulder. "I can't believe Sarah chose that man over you," Jasmine said as she helped me unpack my few belongings. "After everything you've done for her." He was right. After Dad died, I'd given Sarah my entire inheritance to help pay off the house. I'd worked part-time through nursing school so I could contribute to bills. I'd been her emotional support through every crisis, every bad relationship, every moment when grief threatened to swallow her whole. And she'd repaid that loyalty by allowing her boyfriend to terrorize me. But leaving wasn't revenge, it was survival. I threw myself into work, picking up extra shifts to save money for my own place. I avoided Sarah's calls, her texts begging me to come home and work things out. The breakthrough came when Dr. Martinez at the clinic offered me a promotion to head medical assistant. The pay increase would finally allow me to afford my own apartment. "You've earned this, Anna," she told me during our meeting. "Your dedication hasn't gone unnoticed." That night, I celebrated with Jasmine over Chinese takeout and cheap wine. We were toasting my new independence when my phone rang. It was Sarah and she was crying. "Anna, baby, I need you to come home. Something terrible has happened." Every instinct told me to hang up, but something in her voice, pure terror, made me hesitate. "What happened, Sarah?" "It's Derek," she sobbed. "He hurt me, Anna. Really bad. And now he's saying if I call the police, he'll make sure everyone knows about the money." My blood turned to ice. "What money?" Against Jasmine's advice, I went to see Sarah. What I found broke my heart and ignited a fury I didn't know I possessed. My stepmom was sitting on the couch, her left eye swollen shut, her lips split in 3 places. Her beautiful braids were half ripped out, and I could see finger-shaped bruises around her throat. "Oh my God, Sarah," I whispered, my nursing instincts overriding my anger as I gently examined her injuries. "He said I was getting too comfortable," she whispered through damaged lips. "Said I needed to remember my place." I wanted to feel vindicated, to throw her own words back at her, to remind her how she dismissed my bruises, my pain, my fear. But looking at her broken form, I felt only sadness for the woman who had once been like a mother to me. "What money was he talking about?" I asked as I cleaned her wounds. Sarah's good eye darted away from mine. "Anna, I need to tell you something. About your father's life insurance policy." My hands stilled. "What about it?" "There was more money than I told you. A lot more." The room spun around me. "How much more?" $250,000. I sank into the chair across from her, my mind reeling. "You told me there was barely enough to pay off the house." "I was scared," she whispered. "I'd never had that much money before. I wanted to invest it, make it grow for both of us. So I gave it to Derek to put into his construction business." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. "He stole Dad's insurance money." "All of it," she confirmed, fresh tears streaming down her battered face. And now he's saying if I go to the police about what he did to me, he'll disappear with everything. He knows I can't prove the money was ever mine. I stared at this woman who had betrayed me in every possible way, who had chosen her abuser over her own family, and felt something cold and calculating settle in my chest. Derek had made one crucial mistake. He'd hurt the wrong people. I spent the next 3 days researching everything I could about Derek Williams. Social media, public records, employment history. I became a detective driven by righteous fury. What I discovered painted a picture of a man who made a career out of exploiting vulnerable women. 3 previous relationships with similar patterns. Moving in quickly, isolating his partner from family, gaining access to their finances, then disappearing when things got complicated. But Derek had never dealt with someone like me. Someone who understood that sometimes justice has to be taken, not waited for. I reached out to his ex-girlfriends through careful social media detective work. The first one, Denise, agreed to meet me at a coffee shop downtown. "That man is a predator," she told me, her hands shaking as she stirred her latte. "He took $40,000 from my divorce settlement, said he was going to flip houses with it. Instead, he bought a fancy car and disappeared when I started asking questions." "Did you go to the police?" What was I going to say? That I willingly gave money to my boyfriend for an investment? He was smart about it, made sure everything looked consensual. The second ex, Tiana, had an even worse story. He broke 3 of my ribs when I threatened to tell his boss about the money he stole from me. Said he had friends who would make sure I disappeared if I caused trouble. By the end of the week, I had documentation of Derek's patterns spanning 5 years and at least 4 victims. But I also knew that wasn't enough for the law to touch him. It was time to get creative. I started by doing what I did best, gathering information. Derek worked for Hernandez Construction, a family-owned business with an impeccable reputation in our community. I happened to know Miguel Hernandez from the clinic. His daughter was one of my regular patients. It was time to have a conversation. Miguel Hernandez was exactly the kind of man my father had been, hardworking, honest, and fiercely protective of his family's reputation. When I approached him about Derek during his daughter's appointment, his expression grew increasingly dark. "Are you certain about these allegations, Anna?" he asked, his voice grave. I showed him the photos of Sarah's injuries, the statements from Derek's previous victims, and the documentation of the missing insurance money. "This man has been working for me for 8 months, Miguel said, studying the evidence. "If even half of this is true." "It's all true, Mr. Hernandez. And there's more." I had spent the previous night going through Derek's social media posts with a fine-tooth comb. What I found was a trail of expensive purchases over the past 6 months. Jewelry, electronics, a motorcycle, all far beyond what a construction worker's salary could support. "He's been posting about his investments paying off," I explained, showing Miguel the screenshots. "But according to his ex-girlfriends, he's never successfully completed any business venture. This money had to come from somewhere." Miguel was quiet for a long moment, then pulled out his phone. "I'm calling my accountant. If Derek has been stealing from my company too, there will be consequences." That afternoon, Miguel discovered that Derek had been submitting false expense reports and billing for materials that were never purchased. The total theft from Hernandez Construction, $37,000. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more card to play, and it was the most dangerous one. I was going to confront Derek directly. "Anna, no," Jasmine pleaded when I told her my plan. "That man is violent. He could seriously hurt you." "He's already seriously hurt me," I replied, touching the scar on my lip that would never fully fade. "And he's hurt Sarah and God knows how many other women. Someone has to stop him. Then let the police handle it. The police can't get the money back. And they can't make sure he never does this to another woman." I had a plan that would accomplish both. I chose a public place for the confrontation, the parking lot of Derek's favorite sports bar, where he went every Friday night to watch games and brag to his buddies about his latest conquests. I waited until he came outside for a smoke break, then approached him with my phone already recording. "Derek, we need to talk." He turned, and that familiar predatory smile spread across his face. Well. Little Anna finally crawled out of her hole. "Come to apologize." "Actually, I came to make you an offer." His eyebrows raised with interest. "Oh yeah? What kind of offer?" The kind where you give back every penny you stole from my family and in return I don't destroy your life. Derek laughed, a sound like broken glass. You think you're in a position to threaten me? Girl, you don't know what you're dealing with. Don't I? I pulled out my folder of evidence. Because I think I know exactly what I'm dealing with. A small-time con artist who preys on grieving women and steals from honest businesses. His smile faltered as I began reading from my notes. Denise Washington, 40,000 stolen. Tiana Brooks, 25,000 plus hospital bills for the ribs you broke. Sandra Mills, 15,000 for that car you wrecked and never paid for. And now Sarah, $250,000 of my father's life insurance money. You can't prove any of that, he said, but his voice had lost its confidence. Can't I? Because Miguel Hernandez might disagree. See, he's been very interested in your expense reports lately. Amazing how creative you got with those material receipts. Derek stepped closer, his hand moving to his pocket. You're playing a dangerous game, little girl. No, Derek. You're the one who's been playing games. But the game is over now. I held up my phone, making sure he could see the recording light. Miguel's already filed a police report. Denise and Tiana have agreed to press charges. And I've got enough evidence to bury you under the jail. So here's your choice. Return Sarah's money, leave town, and never contact any of us again. Or spend the next 10 years in prison. Derek's face went through a range of emotions. Surprise, anger, calculation, and finally fear. He wasn't used to being cornered by someone who had done their homework. Even if I wanted to give the money back, he said slowly, I don't have it anymore. You have the motorcycle, the jewelry, the electronics. And I know you've got cash stashed somewhere. Men like you always have an escape fund. He studied me with new respect and something that looked almost like admiration. You're smarter than I gave you credit for. Smart enough to know that you've got maybe 48 hours before this whole house of cards comes crashing down. The police are going to start connecting dots, and when they do, you'll lose any chance of walking away from this. Derek was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. I could see the gears turning in his head, calculating risks, considering escape routes, trying to find an angle. What guarantee do I have that you won't press charges anyway? He asked finally. You don't, I said simply. But I'm offering you something better than a guarantee. I'm offering you a head start. That got his attention. Return $100,000 to Sarah by Sunday night. That's less than half of what you stole, but it's enough for her to start over. In exchange, I'll tell Miguel and the other women to hold off on pressing charges for 72 hours. And then what? Then you disappear. Forever. You leave this city, you never contact any of us again, and you find a new line of work that doesn't involve stealing from women. Derek laughed bitterly. You think you're so smart, but you don't understand how the world works. Men like me don't just disappear because little girls ask nicely. No, I agreed. They disappear because they're smart enough to recognize when they're beaten. I stepped closer, close enough to smell the fierce sweat starting to bead on his forehead. The question is, are you smart, Derek? Or are you going to let your ego write a check your freedom can't cash? The next 48 hours were the longest of my life. I had made a calculated gamble, and now all I could do was wait to see if Derek was as smart as I thought he was, or if his pride would lead him to make a fatal mistake. I stayed with Sarah during this time, partly to protect her and partly to make sure she was prepared for whatever came next. Her physical wounds were healing, but the emotional damage ran much deeper. I'm sorry, Anna, she said for the 100th time as I helped her ice her still swollen eye. I should have listened to you about Derek. I should have protected you. Why didn't you? I asked, the question that had been burning in my chest for months finally finding voice. Sarah was quiet for so long I thought she wasn't going to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. Because I was scared of being alone again. After your daddy died, I felt like I was drowning in grief and bills and responsibility. When Derek came along, he made me feel like I could breathe again. Like I was desirable, not just a burden. She looked at me with her one good eye, tears streaming down her face. I told myself that you were strong, that you could handle Derek's attitude. But deep down I knew what I was doing. I was choosing my own comfort over your safety, and I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life. It wasn't enough. Her apology couldn't undo the months of betrayal, the physical and emotional abuse I'd endured, or the trust that had been shattered. But it was a start. On Sunday evening, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Parking lot behind First National Bank. Come alone. Derek had made his choice. I found him waiting by a black SUV I'd never seen before, a duffel bag at his feet. He looked older somehow, diminished by the reality of his situation. 100,000, he said without preamble, kicking the bag toward me. Count it if you want. I unzipped the bag and saw neat stacks of hundreds. It was more money than I'd ever seen in one place. Smart choice, I said, zipping it back up. Don't think this makes us even, Derek said, his voice carrying echoes of his old menace. Someday when you least expect it. No, I interrupted, my voice cutting through his threat like a blade. There won't be a someday. Because if you ever come near me, Sarah, or any other woman in this city, I'll make sure the full weight of the law comes down on you. And next time I won't be offering you a head start. Derek stared at me for a long moment, then got in the SUV and drove away into the night. I never saw him again. 6 months later, my life looked completely different. The promotion at the clinic had led to another opportunity, running a new community health program that focused on helping domestic violence survivors. It was demanding work but deeply fulfilling. Sarah had used part of the recovered money to get counseling and the rest to start over in a smaller apartment across town. She was working on rebuilding her life and slowly trying to rebuild our relationship. It would never be the same as it was before Derek, but we were learning to trust each other again. I enrolled in those self-defense classes you recommended, she told me during one of our weekly coffee dates. The instructor says I'm a natural. Good, I said, meaning it. You should never feel helpless again. I also wanted to thank you, she continued. Not just for getting the money back, but for showing me what strength looks like. The way you handled Derek. I've never seen anything like it. I had been thinking about that too. The person who confronted Derek in that parking lot was someone I hadn't known existed inside me. Calculating, fearless, willing to take risks to protect the people I loved. I learned something about myself through all this, I told her. I learned that sometimes you have to be your own hero. The real validation had come a few weeks earlier when I received a call from Detective Rivera, who had been investigating Derek's activities. We finally caught up with your friend Derek Williams, she told me. He tried to run the same scam on a woman in Atlanta. Unfortunately for him, she was married to a prosecutor. What happened? He's looking at 15 to 20 years for fraud, extortion, and assault. Turns out, when we dug deeper into his background, we found a lot more victims than even you uncovered. I felt a deep satisfaction knowing that Derek would never hurt another woman the way he'd hurt us. But the most surprising development came when Miguel Hernandez offered me a position managing the employee assistance program for his construction company. We need someone who understands how to spot trouble before it becomes a crisis, he explained. And you've proven you have the courage to act when action is needed. It was a significant pay increase and a chance to help prevent other women from going through what I'd experienced. 1 year after that terrible Tuesday night when Derek first hit me, I was standing in the living room of my own apartment. A bright, safe space that belonged entirely to me. I had invited Sarah, Jasmine, and a few other friends over for a housewarming party. As I looked around at the faces of the people who mattered most to me, I felt a deep sense of peace. The scared, trapped girl who had once cowered in her childhood bedroom was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her own worth and wouldn't accept anything less than respect. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Unknown number. Hello. Heavy breathing, then a familiar voice, rough, desperate. Anna. It's Derek. Every muscle in my body tensed, but my voice remained steady. How did you get this number? I need help, he said, ignoring my question. I'm in real trouble. The people I owe money to, they're going to kill me. I need somewhere to stay just for a few days until I can figure something out. The audacity took my breath away. You want me to help you? I know how it sounds, but you're the only person I can trust. You're smart, you're resourceful. I'm hanging up now. Wait. Please, Anna. I'm sorry for everything. I was wrong to treat you the way I did, wrong to take your family's money. But I'm desperate here. I'm begging you. For a moment, I felt a flicker of something that might have been pity. Here was the man who had terrorized me, reduced to begging the very person he'd abused. But then I remembered the feel of his fist against my face, the way Sarah had looked with her eyes swollen shut, the months of fear and helplessness I'd endured. Derek, I said, my voice calm and clear. Do you remember what you told me that first night when you grabbed my wrist? Silence. You said I lived in that house because Sarah allowed it. Well, now you're homeless because I don't allow you in my life. That's what consequences look like. Anna, please. The answer is no. Don't call this number again. I hung up and blocked the number immediately. Jasmine appeared at my elbow with a glass of wine. Everything okay? Everything's perfect, I said and meant it. Outside my window, the sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. I had built this life myself. The job, the apartment, the relationships, the confidence. It was all mine, earned through courage and determination. Derek was someone else's problem now. As for me, I was finally, completely free. Sometimes I wonder if I should have just kept the peace and given in. But then I remember what they said and did, and I get angry all over again. What would you have done in my situation? Did I make the right call?